Okay, in the last video I said I'd put out a collection of polls asking what you guys determine to be true distortions, versus entities that simply resemble distortions. I've collected all the data, but before I get into those, there was one comment in the previous video that I particularly liked. Chaos Cod gives a great overview on the logic behind a person's distorted mindset and an ego user's mindset, which all summarize as painting over the world versus building a bastion within the world. Not only is this a great description of the personal philosophies behind distortion, but it also helped me to put together my own explanation on distortion. In essence, distortion is something that a person does, not something that is done to them. It is a decision made either consciously or unconsciously. This helps explain why people don't always distort even when put under incredible pressure, because it's simply not where their instincts take them. Simple as that. In addition, it's why thinking that ego makes you immune to distortion is flawed, because you can't be immune to your own decision. It does probably make you immune to the influences of a monolith, though. Okay, and with that, let's get into the results of the polls. When it comes to Pekatula, you guys pretty firmly said no, and this has material to back it up. Namely, Hohenheim talks about how Pekatula are the byproduct of a failed distortion. Essentially, they seem to sort of be the building blocks of distortion. A sort of raw distortion, if you will. This makes it a little difficult to determine if they technically count as one, but we don't need completely solid answers, just enough to understand them at a basic level. Hohenheim describes the odds of turning into a Pekatula as a 50-50 coin flip, but I think that's just Hohenheim showing his disdain for probability. A sort of, it either happens or it doesn't kind of mindset. I mean, consider if, for every Pekatulum we fight, there was a fully fledged distortion out there somewhere. That's just too many damn distortions. Speaking of Pekatula in dungeons, I don't think each individual Pekatula was a person. That's certainly one way for them to come about, but I think they can also just kinda appear wherever there's like a golden bow, or a monolith, or whatever. They're the basic components of a distortion, after all. It would make sense if they just sort of leaked out from these influential items. Onto something else now. Blood Fiends were introduced as a form of distortion, but quickly adjusted to be distortion adjacent. So I collected your thoughts on the matter, separating the classic Blood Fiends from the new wave of Blood Fiend distortions talked about in Distortion Detective. The response was pretty conclusive that you guys don't believe that these new Blood Fiends are technically Blood Fiends at all, just distortions that take on similar traits, and I can't disagree. There was already a lot of seemingly intentional confusion with whether or not Blood Fiends were distortions, and given that the Blood Fiend arc of Distortion Detective went unfinished, I could see the intended conclusion clarifying the distinction. But why do Blood Fiends register as being so close to distortions? Well, I think it has to do with the rivers. While we don't know much about these mysterious things, it's clear that they are related in some way to the well of humanity described by Bina. I think there was probably a river of blood that some dude drank from, then ended up making a vampiric pyramid scheme. Since it's a similar twisting of the self to distortions, there's kind of a correlation there. I think a similar correlation can be drawn between, say, Wild Hunt Heathcliff and Ego, but that's a discussion for another day. Now, we move on to the Sephira meltdowns, and you were all pretty firm on them not being distortions. But frankly, I disagree. Most of the arguments against them being distortions boiled down to this occurring before the White Nights and Darkest Days, to which I ask, what was the thing we were progressing towards during our entire playthroughs? That, thing that was the entire point of this time loop? This transformation is a physical warping of the self based on a person's trauma and deep desires. It showcases the perpetrator's way of lashing out at the world around them, and when resolved, they have a better understanding of themselves and their place in the world. I see no reason to distinguish this from any kind of other distortion. It serves the exact same narrative role and basically introduces the concept to us before we even get a name for it. Sure, you could call this some sort of proto-distortion, but that's still a distortion, even if the exact details are slightly different. Now, onto one I was actually kinda surprised by. I asked the audience if Roland's various boss forms were distortions, and the general consensus was that yes, at least some of them are distortions. After the previous poll, I was pretty surprised, since it seemed like they were pretty similar instances to the Sephira meltdowns. I'd take it a step further and say that really all of them are distortions. Sure, the library has a strong effect on why and how these forms appear, but it's only an amplification of what he's already going through, like with Zhao's ego. I've heard people use the idea of distorted ego when talking about some of these forms, particularly the last one, but all distortions are distorted egos, so that's a bit redundant. I don't think that any of these forms are conventional ego, simply because that requires a level of control and restraint that Roland simply doesn't have at the moment. Anyway, that's it for this little follow-up. I'm super excited for Canto 9. I will be either recording it or streaming it. I don't fully know which, but whatever the case, you will be getting my reactions. See you next year for not only more Limbus, Stars of the City, and Magic the Gathering content, but I'll also be introducing my old Fire Emblem project to the channel as well. Stay tuned, and Happy New Year!